Hello, everyone. Phil Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. Today is Tuesday, the 15th of February, 2022. Click on the subscribe button here in the lower right to subscribe to future episodes, and also to be notified when those episodes release. Click on the notification bell in the far upper right. Today's topic is Reconstruction Era Chicanery. Post-war Southern Reconstruction became corrupted when congressional Republicans took charge of it with the March 1867 Reconstruction Acts, almost 2 years after President Abraham Lincoln's assassination. Prior to that, the process began in December 1863 under Lincoln while the war was still in progress. After Lincoln died and Andrew Johnson succeeded him to the presidency, Johnson tried to continue with a presidential Reconstruction Plan. Johnson first granted amnesty to the ordinary Confederates who would take a new Union loyalty oath, which would immunize them to charges of treason and also enable them to own property without any dispute. Wealthy Southerners and Confederate leaders, however, would be required by Johnson to petition directly to the president for amnesty on a case-by-case basis. So this wasn't a blanket amnesty for everybody. Now, to be readmitted to the Union, the former Confederate states were required to outlaw slavery, repudiate their Civil War debts, and rescind their secession ordinances. All complied, but Congress would not seat their elected representatives. There's a provision in the Constitution that allows Congress to decide who they're going to seat. They abused that provision in this case. Radical congressional Republicans began the takeover process early in 1866 when they gained a veto-proof majority early that year. During the ensuing 12 months or so, they wrote the 14th Amendment and prepared the Reconstruction Acts, the 1867 Acts. The Acts required martial law in the southern states until those states were readmitted to the Union under terms satisfactory to the Republican Congress. Those terms would require universal black male suffrage in all former Confederate, but not northern states. And it would also require the disfranchisement of selected Confederate leaders. The radicals intended to use the Southern black vote to create puppet regimes in the region in order to ensure that the infant GOP retained control of the Washington government after the Southern states were readmitted. After the federal process was completed, blacks composed most of the voters in 5 of the 11 former Confederate states: Mississippi, South Carolina, Louisiana, Florida, and Alabama. They comprised about half of the vote in Georgia, which would enable carpetbaggers in that state to control the state with just a small number of them when they unified with the blacks. Now, the problem for the Republicans was that whites still held decisive majorities in the remaining former Confederate states outside of those 6, except for Tennessee, where they already had a Republican vassal regime. So in most of those states where the whites were still a majority after the Reconstruction Acts were in the Upper South. Texas was an exception. And that's where the chicanery gets convoluted, with those states where white majorities were still in place. The Reconstruction chicanery gets really convoluted. Republicans gain control in the remaining southern states in different ways, but in this example, we'll consider how it happened in Arkansas. First, when the state's 1868 carpetbag constitution was put to a vote for ratification in the state, the vote outcome was arbitrarily decided by General G.H. Smith. He was the sub-district commander and basically a dictator in Arkansas under martial law. He could do anything he wanted. And although the tallies favoring the Constitution were clearly fraudulent, Smith ruled that they were valid. When his opposition showed that the number of votes in the state's most populous county, for example, which had voted 5-1 in favor of this Republican Constitution, when they showed that the number of votes in that county exceeded the number of registered voters by 20%, Smith ignored the complaint. It didn't get him what he wanted. He wanted a Republican vassal regime there, and come hell or high water, he was going to get it through his dictatorial martial rule powers. Now, the second, after carpetbagger Powell Clayton was inaugurated the state's governor in July 1868, his legislature passed a sneaky act, a provision requiring all Confederates who took President Johnson's post-bellum allegiance oath to the Union. It required that they must prove that they had not broken that oath since they took it. I consider this is an oath they took after the war. So they didn't go to war to fight after they took this oath, but they still had to prove they did not break that oath. And the law stipulated basically only two practical ways for an oath taker to show that he complied with the oath. One was to show that he had openly advocated for congressional, not Johnson, not Lincoln's, but congressional Reconstruction. The other was to provide compelling evidence that he had voted for Arkansas's 1868 carpetbag Constitution. In other words, basically the only way that he could prove he had not broken the oath was to show that he was a Republican. Arkansas's radical Reconstruction ended in 1876. Since it ended in 1876, the number of ex-Confederates disfranchised by Powell Clayton and the 1868 Republican Congress in the state can be estimated by comparing the number of votes in 1868, when carpetbaggers, scallywags, and blacks were the only ones who could vote, to the number of votes in 1876, when all adult males could vote. So when only carpetbaggers, scallywags, and blacks could vote in 1868, 41,000 Arkansans voted for in the presidential election. 8 years later, in 1876, when all adult males could vote in Arkansas, 95,000 voted. The difference of 54,000 suggests that at least 57% of the former Confederate Arkansans were disfranchised. Now, a similar calculation will show that the abuse in Tennessee was even worse, and I may do that in a future episode. But for now, let me share on my screen something that will be pertinent to our discussion today, and that is my book, Southern Reconstruction. This book should give you an objective analysis, an objective narrative of what really happened during Reconstruction, because you don't get it from the academics or the people that are writing Reconstruction history now. It's just not there. What we're seeing is totally biased Reconstruction out of the colleges and elsewhere that have one purpose, two purposes. One is to demonize white Southerners and to glorify the Republican Party of the Reconstruction era. And both of those are false narratives. So if you get this book, you can get it's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, I think it's $26. If you want an autographed copy from me, just contact me, it'll be $29, and I'll deliver it here free of charge in the States for $29. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing now, and want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.